With no money to pay for the daycare, a poor woman takes her twin daughters to work and nearly faints when the girls burst into a meeting and call the billionaire boss Daddy in front of everyone. The alarm rang like a sentence, slicing through the darkness of the bedroom at 4:30 a.m. Sophie Ribeiro opened her eyes, feeling every muscle in her body protest. Another day was beginning before the sun even dared to appear on New York's horizon. Her small apartment on the outskirts of the city was silent, except for the soft sound of breathing coming from the next room. Lily and Emma, her 4-year-old twins, were still in a deep sleep, blissfully unaware of the daily battle their mother fought against time and circumstance. Sophie allowed herself exactly 60 seconds to lie there, gazing at the shadows on the ceiling. It was her only moment of peace in the day, that stolen minute between waking and starting. Her fingers automatically traced the scar at the base of her neck, a physical reminder of that night 4 years ago. The night that changed everything. With a resigned sigh, she got up. The cold floor beneath her bare feet was a cruel reminder of reality. The heater had broken 2 weeks ago, and fixing it would have to wait until the next paycheck, assuming there was anything left after paying all the bills. In the tiny bathroom, Sophie stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror. At 28, her face still showed traces of the beauty that once captured the attention of one of the most powerful men in New York. But now, deep circles marked her green eyes, and her brown hair, once always immaculate, was tied in a careless bun. "You can do this," she murmured to herself as she did every morning. "You have to." In the kitchen, she opened the fridge and her heart tightened. Resources were more limited than usual this month. The milk was almost gone, and there was only enough bread for today. She did a quick mental calculation. There were still 3 days left until payday. She would have to be creative again. With precise gestures born of routine, she began preparing breakfast. She cut the last 2 slices of bread into star shapes, a trick she'd learned to make the food look more plentiful to the girls. The little milk remaining was split into 2 colorful cups, diluted with water. The children never complained. They had learned far too early not to ask for more than they could have. At 5:15, she headed to the twins' room. Her heart melted, as it always did, at the sight of Lily and Emma sleeping. They were identical down to the smallest details. The same golden curls spread over the pillows, the same long lashes, the same upturned noses. In that peaceful moment, it was impossible not to see Thomas in them. The same aristocratic features, the same natural elegance, even in such little children. "Girls," she called gently, "time to wake up." Emma was the first to stir, as always. Her blue eyes, Thomas's eyes, opened slowly. "It's still dark, Mommy," she murmured sleepily. "I know, my love, but we need to get ready for daycare." Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers through Lily's hair, who was also beginning to wake up. "I don't want to go," Lily protested, burying her face in the pillow. Sophie took a deep breath. This was the hardest part of her mornings, beyond physical exhaustion. There was guilt. What kind of mother wakes her small children in the dark to leave them with strangers? But what choice did she have? "Let's play a game," she proposed, using her most cheerful tone. "Whoever gets dressed first gets a special drawing on their snack." Mentioning drawings on their lunch always worked. Within minutes, although still sleepy, the twins were on their feet. Sophie helped them with their clothes, simple daycare uniforms, carefully maintained and ironed, though some stains were now impossible to remove. While the girls ate, Sophie rushed to get ready herself. Her wardrobe was a study in efficiency. 5 work outfits, all in neutral tones, all purchased on clearance. She chose the grey blazer. She had an important meeting today, and this one hid signs of wear better than the others. The clock read 6:15 by the time they finally left the apartment. Sophie carried her worn-out purse, a bag with the girls' snacks, and a folder with work documents. Lily and Emma, each with their little backpack, walked hand in hand right behind her. The elevator was broken. Again. They went down 4 flights of stairs, the girls complaining every step of the way. Outside, the cold morning air greeted them with a merciless gust. Sophie pulled the girls' coats tighter, checking that they were bundled up warmly. The bus stop was crowded as usual. Sophie kept the girls close, shielding them from the crowd. The first bus went by jam-packed, not stopping. The second was the same. On the third, they managed to squeeze in, though there were no seats available. "Mommy, I'm tired," Emma whispered after standing 20 minutes. Sophie lifted her into her arms, balancing precariously while holding Lily's hand with her other one. Her arms ached, but she smiled for her daughters. "We'll be there soon, my love." The municipal daycare was 2 blocks from the stop where they got off. It was a simple building with peeling walls painted in pastel colors. It wasn't the best place, Sophie knew, but it was what she could afford, or used to be able to afford. Sandra, the director, stood at the gate, greeting the children. Her look upon seeing Sophie was telling, "Monsieur Ribeiro, could we talk for a moment?" Sophie's stomach clenched. She knew what was coming. The overdue payment notice had arrived the previous week. "I can't right now, Sandra. I'm late for work. Can we talk at pickup time?" "It's important," Sandra insisted, but Sophie was already kissing the girls goodbye in a rush. "Behave, my loves. Mommy will be back this afternoon." She turned quickly so the girls wouldn't see the tears threatening to fall. The clock read 7:45 when Sophie finally arrived at the imposing building of Steinberg Enterprises, 15 minutes late. Her heart sped up as she passed through the reception turnstile. She knew he would notice. Thomas Steinberg was known for his impeccable punctuality and for expecting the same from his employees. At 35, he had transformed the family company into an empire, expanding business beyond the country's borders. He was respected, feared, and, Sophie knew better than anyone, completely ruthless. The executive elevator was empty when she entered. In the mirror's reflection, she tried to tidy her hair messed up by the wind and the rush. A drop of sweat trickled down her temple, and she wiped it away quickly with the back of her hand. The doors opened on the 20th floor, and Sophie felt her stomach sink. Thomas stood in the hallway, impeccable in his Italian suit, speaking with 2 executives. His blue eyes, cold as ice, met hers for a fleeting moment. "Miss Ribeiro." His voice was controlled, almost polite, but Sophie knew that tone too well. "My office, now." The executives exchanged knowing looks as she passed. Sophie kept her head high, though her hands trembled slightly. She followed Thomas into his office, a spacious room with a panoramic view of the city. "Close the door," he ordered, not looking at her. Sophie obeyed, feeling like a teenager about to be reprimanded by the principal. Thomas sat in his leather chair, his fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. 15 minutes late, Miss Ribeiro." "This is becoming a habit." "I'm sorry, sir. The traffic was—" "Spare me the excuses," he cut her off, his voice razor-sharp. "You know the company policies. 3 tardies in a month warrant a formal warning." Sophie felt her blood run cold. A formal warning could jeopardize her chances of getting the raise she desperately needed. "Please, Mr. Steinberg." "It won't happen again." Thomas finally looked at her, and for a moment so brief Sophie might have imagined it, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, regret. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the usual mask of indifference. "Consider this your final warning," he said, turning his attention back to the papers on his desk. "You may go." Sophie left the office on unsteady legs. At her desk, she found a pile of reports waiting for her review. She turned on her computer with trembling hands, trying to focus on work. But her mind was miles away, thinking of 2 little girls with golden curls and blue eyes identical to the man who had just threatened her job, the man who had no idea his daughters existed. The phone rang, startling her. It was from the daycare. "Miss Ribeiro?" Sandra's voice sounded grave. "We really need to discuss your situation." Sophie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. How could she explain she had no way to pay? That every cent of her salary was already committed to rent, bills, and food. "Sandra, please." Her voice came out almost as a whisper. "Give me just a few more days. My paycheck comes next week. I'm sorry, but we can't wait any longer. The payments are 3 months overdue. If there's no settlement by tomorrow, we won't be able to keep the girls here." The world seemed to stop. Sophie looked through the glass partition at Thomas's office. He was on the phone, gesturing as he spoke, probably closing yet another multi-million-dollar deal. I understand," she replied mechanically. "I'll figure it out today." She hung up and sat still for a few minutes, her mind working furiously. She had no one to turn to. Her parents had passed away years ago, she had no siblings, and her few friends could barely support their own families. Her eyes returned to Thomas's office. He was now standing, looking out at the New York skyline, his profile silhouetted against the skyscrapers, so close and yet so far. The idea struck like a desperate flash. A salary advance. It was against company policy, she knew, but what choice did she have? She had to try. She stood, smoothing her blazer with sweaty hands. Claire, her co-worker at the adjacent desk, gave her a worried look. "Everything okay, Sophie?" "Yes," she lied, forcing a smile. "I just need to speak with Mr. Steinberg." The walk to his office never felt so long. Each step felt like lead, each heartbeat a reminder of what was at stake. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in." Thomas was seated again, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. He didn't bother looking at her. "Mr. Steinberg," Sophie began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I need to make a request." He continued typing for a few more seconds before finally raising his gaze. "Be brief. I need an advance on my salary." The words spilled out quickly. "It's an emergency." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her with unsettling intensity. "Company policy on advances is quite clear, Miss Ribeiro." "I know, but—" Sophie took a deep breath. "It's truly an emergency. I promise I'll work extra hours to repay it." "No." The response was swift and cold like a slap. Sophie felt her last hopes shatter. "Please," her voice quivered. "I wouldn't ask if it weren't absolutely necessary. Every employee has personal problems, Miss Ribeiro." Thomas returned his attention to the computer. "I cannot make exceptions. It would undermine the company's order." Sophie stood there, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to scream, to tell the truth, to throw in his face that his daughters needed him, but the words died in her throat. "Is that all?" His voice was distant, professional. "Yes, sir," she answered automatically, turning to leave. "And Miss Ribeiro," she stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "Next time, schedule a meeting properly. I don't appreciate interruptions." Sophie closed the door softly behind her, her legs barely supporting her weight. At her desk, she sank into her chair, her mind spinning with possible solutions. The clock on the wall read 10:30. In a few hours, she would need to pick up the girls from daycare. And tomorrow? What would she do tomorrow? The answer came as a whisper from her conscience. The girls would have to come with her to work. It was risky, absurd, and would probably get her fired if discovered. But what other choice did she have? Sophie spent the rest of the day mentally planning how to make it work. Her desk was in a relatively discreet corner of the office. If she arrived very early, before anyone else, if she kept the girls quiet with games and drawings, maybe, just maybe, she could get through one day without being found out. At 5 o'clock, when most employees started packing up to leave, Sophie was still at her desk, mentally listing everything she would need: coloring materials, quiet games, snacks that wouldn't make a mess. She would have to stop at a store before picking up the girls. "Staying late today?" Claire asked, tidying her desk to go home. "No, just organizing a few things," Sophie replied vaguely, avoiding her colleague's gaze. She hated lying, but the fewer people who knew her plan, the better. Through the glass partition, she could see Thomas still in his office, now on a video call with international investors. His deep voice occasionally cut through the glass walls. reminding everyone of his constant, watchful presence. "Good evening, Miss Ribeiro," his voice came through the intercom on her desk, making her jump. "Don't forget to email me the quarterly report before you leave." "Yes, sir," she responded mechanically, her hand trembling slightly over the intercom button. It was typical of him to make such a request at the last minute of the workday. While finalizing the report, Sophie mentally rehearsed what she would tell the girls, how she would explain that they had to remain quiet, hidden, all day long, how she would make it seem like a grand adventure instead of a desperate act. Her fingers brushed an old crumpled envelope at the bottom of her purse, the final notice from the daycare. By tomorrow, this would be one more problem solved, one way or another. At 6:30, she finally sent the report and turned off the computer. The office was almost empty now, with only a few lights still on here and there. Thomas remained in his office, still on the phone, completely absorbed in his world of business and power. Sophie grabbed her bag and stepped into the elevator. Before the doors closed, she took one last look at his office. A shiver ran down her spine. This place held so many secrets, and tomorrow another one would be added to the list. "Tomorrow will be different," she murmured to herself. She had no idea how right she was. In less than 24 hours, the 20th floor of Steinberg Enterprises would be the stage for revelations no one could have predicted. Fate had chosen its moment, and not even the powerful Thomas Steinberg could stop what was coming. But for now, Sophie had shopping to do, and two little girls to prepare for the biggest adventure of their lives. The next day promised to be interesting. The lobby clock at Steinberg Enterprises read 6:15 a.m. when Sophie walked through the revolving doors, firmly holding Lily and Emma's hands. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain the security guards could hear it. "Good morning, Mr. Gray," she greeted the older security guard, trying to sound casual. "These are my nieces. Their nanny got sick and—" "No need to explain, Miss Sophie," he replied with a kind smile. "Kids are always welcome." In the empty elevator, Sophie knelt to meet her daughters at eye level. "Remember what we talked about? Today we're playing a very special game. The quiet game," Emma recited proudly. "That's right, my love, and whoever makes the least noise gets a prize," Lily finished, a bit too loudly. "Shh!" Sophie placed a finger to her lips, her heart racing. The game has already started. The 20th floor was dimly lit when they arrived. Sophie led the girls to her workstation, strategically located in a quieter corner of the office. She had never been more thankful for that spot than she was at that moment. "Look what Mommy brought," she whispered, pulling coloring books, crayons, and the old tablets she had managed to buy at a thrift store the night before out of her bag. She had spent hours downloading silent educational games. "You have a special mission today." She arranged a small space beneath her desk, using her folder as a makeshift divider. It was cramped, but the girls were small enough to fit. She placed a little rug she'd brought from home so they wouldn't feel the cold floor. By 7 o'clock, the first employees began arriving. Sophie pretended to be engrossed in her work, answering overdue emails with forced concentration. Her entire body was tense, listening for any sound that might come from under the desk. "Sophie," Claire's voice startled her. "You're here early." "Oh, yes," Sophie replied, trying to sound natural. "I had some reports to get a head start on." Claire frowned, noticing something was off. "Are you okay? You seem tense." "Just tired," Sophie forced a smile. "Lots to do." A muffled giggle came from beneath the desk. Sophie's blood ran cold, but Claire was already walking away, distracted by her own phone. The morning dragged on in a constant state of tension. Sophie alternated between typing reports and discreetly handing snacks and water to the girls. Miraculously, Lily and Emma behaved better than she had hoped, fully absorbed in their games and coloring. Around 10 o'clock, the office stirred to life. Thomas had arrived, and as always, his presence caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Sophie could hear his footsteps approaching during his usual morning rounds. "Mommy," Emma whispered a little too loudly, "I have to go potty." "Shh!" Sophie whispered back frantically, her heart racing as she saw Thomas's Italian shoes stop just a few desks away. "Ms. Chen," Thomas's voice sounded close. "How is the Asian merger report coming along?" "Almost finished, Mr. Steinberg," Claire answered promptly. Sophie held her breath. If he came to her desk, if the girls made any noise. "And the legal department has approved the terms." "Yes, sir, I just received their confirmation." Sophie felt a little hand tapping her leg. Emma was getting restless. Discreetly, she passed a piece of chocolate under the desk, praying it would be enough to distract her. "Good work," Thomas said. "I want a meeting with the entire team after lunch." His footsteps receded, and Sophie finally breathed. But her relief was short-lived. Now she had a new problem. How would she attend a meeting with the entire team? The rest of the morning passed in a blur of anxiety and small crises. Emma really did need to use the restroom, and Sophie had to create a complex distraction to sneak the girls down the hallway. Lily spilled her juice, nearly staining important documents. A co-worker walked by too closely and almost spotted the little feet peeking out beneath the desk. "Mummy," Lily whispered at one point, "I'm bored." Sophie glanced around nervously before crouching down to retrieve something from her bag, an excuse to check on them. "Just a little longer, sweetheart. You're being so brave." By 3 in the afternoon, Sophie was exhausted. Her back ached from bending to check on the girls, and her mind was split between work and constant vigilance. But she was almost there. A few more hours, and she could leave, proud to have survived this impossible day. Then her phone rang. "Sophie." Patricia's voice, Thomas's secretary, came through the line. "Mr. Steinberg has called an emergency meeting with the entire team. Main conference room in 15 minutes. The world seemed to spin. "Patricia, I'm not feeling well. Could I? It's mandatory." "Sophie." "Direct order from the boss." The phone went silent, leaving Sophie in panic. She looked under the desk at Lily and Emma, still quietly entertained, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Girls," she whispered, "we need to make a small change of plans." The clock read 3:13 p.m. Somewhere in the building, Thomas Steinberg was preparing for a meeting that would forever change the fate of everyone involved. But Sophie still didn't know that. Sophie stared at the digital clock on her desk. The meeting would start in exactly 17 minutes, and she still had no idea what to do with the girls. Her brain raced frantically, searching for a solution that didn't exist. "Claire," she called quietly, when her colleague passed by her desk on the way to the meeting. "Could you possibly—" "Sorry, Sophie, but I'm already late. Thomas wants the Asian merger reports organized before the meeting." Sophie watched Claire walk away, feeling her last hopes vanish. She glanced down at where Lily and Emma were still absorbed in their games. It had been a miracle keeping them quiet this long, but she knew boredom was setting in. "Mommy," Lily whispered, "when do we go home?" "Soon, my love," Sophie answered automatically, her mind still searching for options. She considered pretending to be sick, but Thomas had already made it clear everyone must attend. She thought about leaving the girls in the break room, but that was too risky. Employees came in and out all the time. The intercom on her desk rang again. "Miss Ribeiro," Patricia's voice sounded even more impatient than before. "Mr. Steinberg specifically asked about you. You're responsible for presenting the last quarter's numbers." Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of inevitability. There was no choice. "Girls," she said softly, bending down to their level, "we have to do something very important now. Do you trust Mommy?" 2 pairs of identical blue eyes stared back at her intently. It was remarkable how, even so young, they seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "We're going on a special adventure," Sophie continued, trying to keep her voice steady. "You'll sit quietly in a new spot for a few minutes while I go to a really important meeting. It's like the final stage of our quiet game." "Will it take long?" Emma asked, hugging her teddy bear. "No, my love. And if you stay very quiet, we'll get ice cream afterward." Sophie quickly gathered her things, including the tablets and coloring books. The corridor leading to the conference room had a few waiting benches, partially hidden by large decorative plants. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. "Here," she said, settling the girls on the farthest bench. "You have to stay exactly here, okay? You can't leave this spot for anything in the world." "Why, Mommy?" Lily asked, her curious eyes watching the executives entering the meeting room. "Because," Sophie hesitated, looking for the right words, "because it's part of the game. And you've done so well up to now." The watch on her wrist read 3:27 p.m. She was officially late. "I promise I'll be right back," she said, giving each of them a quick kiss. "Remember, don't move from here." The Steinberg Enterprises conference room was a monument to corporate opulence. A massive oval mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by Italian leather chairs. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city. On the opposite wall, a giant projection screen displayed the charts and figures Sophie was supposed to present. Thomas was already in his usual seat at the head of the table. His eyes met hers as she entered, and Sophie felt that familiar shiver of apprehension. "Miss Ribeiro." His voice was as cold as ever. "I'm glad you decided to join us." "Sorry for being late, sir," she murmured, quickly taking her seat. She tried to focus on the papers in front of her, but her mind was on the corridor, with the girls. The meeting began with Thomas providing an overview of the company's situation. He spoke of necessary cuts, departmental restructuring, resource optimization. Sophie only half listened, her attention divided between the numbers she had to present and the occasional noise from the hallway. "And now," Thomas said after 20 minutes of presentation, "Miss Ribeiro will show us the numbers from the last quarter." Sophie stood on shaky legs, walking to the front of the room. She began her presentation mechanically, years of experience allowing her to speak about projections and statistics while her mind was elsewhere. Then she heard it, a muffled giggle, followed by the sound of small footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. The conference room door was slightly ajar. She'd forgotten to close it completely in her rush. Through the gap, she saw movement. "As you can see on the chart," her voice faltered slightly, "the third quarter showed a drop of..." The door swung open. Lily and Emma, bored from waiting and curious about the voices coming from the room, dashed inside. Their golden curls bounced as they crossed the room, their blue eyes shining with the thrill of their little adventure. "Daddy!" they yelled in unison, running straight toward Thomas. Time seemed to stand still. Sophie felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. The presentation remote slipped from her hand, landing with a dull thud on the carpet. Thomas, who had been jotting notes on his tablet, looked up at the sound of the children's voices. His face, usually a mask of absolute control, shifted into an expression Sophie had never seen before. The entire room held its breath. The twins, oblivious to the chaos they had caused, stopped in front of Thomas's chair, smiling. It was a surreal image, two miniature versions of him, with the same eyes, the same aristocratic features, even the same slight tilt of the head when thinking. "Daddy," Emma repeated, stretching her arms as if expecting to be picked up. "It's you, just like in the picture." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas stared at the girls, his expression a mix of shock and something else, something Sophie couldn't decipher. His right hand gripped the pen so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The executives looked back and forth between Thomas, the girls, and Sophie, who remained frozen at the front of the room, her face pale as paper. Sophie tried to speak, but no words came out. "Everyone out." Thomas's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Now." No one dared question him. Within seconds, the room emptied, leaving only Sophie, Thomas, and the twins, who were beginning to sense that something was wrong. "Mommy?" Lily asked, her small voice trembling. "Did we do something bad?" Thomas stood from his chair slowly, his tall frame seeming to fill the entire room. For a moment, he just stared at the two girls who were his perfect mirror images in miniature. Then, without a word, he turned to the window, giving them all his back. "Sophie!" He spoke in a tightly controlled tone she had never heard before. "Take the girls to my private office. I'll meet you there in 5 minutes." Sophie quickly took the girls by the hand, leading them out of the room. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Before the door closed behind them, she caught one last glimpse of Thomas reflected in the window. For the first time in 4 years, his mask of absolute control had completely slipped. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. Thomas Steinberg's private office occupied the entire east corner of the building's top floor. It was an imposing space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York. The afternoon sun turned the city into a golden mosaic, but no one was paying attention to the spectacular view. Claire had taken the girls to the employees' lounge, promising to show them cartoons on her tablet. Before leaving, Emma had tried to run back to Thomas, but Sophie held her tightly by the hand. The look Thomas gave the girl in that moment was indescribable, a mix of fascination and fear Sophie had never seen on his face before. Now, Sophie stood near the office door, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. Thomas was turned away from her, pouring himself whiskey into a baccarat crystal glass, a gift from some important investor she recalled him receiving once. "Sit," he ordered without turning around. Sophie obeyed, choosing one of the black leather armchairs in front of the imposing desk. The silence between them was so dense it was almost tangible. Through the windows, the sun began its lazy descent toward the horizon, painting the office with orange hues. "The agreement," Thomas finally spoke, his voice controlled, "was extremely clear." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. The agreement. Of course he'd start with that. "You signed a confidentiality statement," he continued, finally turning to face her. The sun behind him created a backlight effect that made it impossible to read his expression. "In exchange for a considerable sum, you agreed to maintain absolute discretion about that night." "That night?" Sophie let out a humorless laugh. "Is that what you call what happened between us?" Thomas took a long sip of his drink before responding. The ice clinked against the crystal, an oddly loud sound in the silence of the office. "What happened between us was a lapse in judgment, on both our parts, hence the agreement." "A lapse in judgment?" Sophie's voice trembled slightly. "Is that what you were thinking when—" She trailed off, biting her lip. Some memories were still too painful to voice. Thomas walked to one of the windows, looking out at the city below. For a moment, his reflection in the glass showed an expression Sophie couldn't decipher. "The past doesn't matter now," he said at last. "What matters is that you breached a legal agreement. The consequences—" "Consequences." Sophie stood abruptly. "You want to talk about consequences, Thomas? How about the consequences of finding out I was pregnant 2 weeks after signing your precious contract? How about the consequences of having to choose between keeping my job and telling the truth? How about the consequences of raising 2 children alone while seeing you every day, knowing they were your daughters?" Her words seemed to strike a nerve in Thomas. He turned sharply, his blue eyes flashing. "You could have told me," he said, his voice dangerously low. "How?" Sophie took a step toward him. "When? After you made it crystal clear your public image was more important than anything else. After you made me sign that agreement like I was some threat to be contained. You don't understand." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "The company was at a crucial point. The European merger depended on my reputation. A scandal at that moment. And now?" Sophie interrupted. "Now that your precious daughters just burst into your boardroom in front of the entire executive team, now that everyone knows the great Thomas Steinberg secretly has 2 daughters with an employee, how's your reputation looking now?" The whiskey glass met the desk with too much force, spilling a few drops of amber liquid on the mahogany surface. "You planned this," he said flatly, not asking. "Bringing the girls today, letting them see me." "No," Sophie exclaimed, her voice cracking. "Do you really think I'd plan something like this? That I'd put my daughters—" "Our daughters," he corrected coldly. that I'd put them in this situation by choice. Tears began to form in her eyes. I had no other option, Thomas. The daycare, I can't afford it anymore. I tried asking for your help yesterday, remember? Just a simple advance. Thomas studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 4 years of secrets and unspoken words. Why didn't you use the money from the agreement? He asked finally. Sophie laughed bitterly. The agreement money? That ran out ages ago. Do you have any idea how much it costs to raise 2 kids in New York? Prenatal care, a twin delivery, the earliest necessities, and then vaccines, clothes, special food. You could have asked for more, as if that would have made a difference. Sophie ran her hands over her face, wiping away tears that insisted on falling. It was never about money, Thomas. It still isn't. Thomas sat down in his chair again, looking suddenly older. The sun had sunk lower on the horizon, and the city's first lights began to twinkle in the distance. They're beautiful, he said suddenly, his voice softer. The girls, they look just like you, Sophie finished. They always have. From the very first moment, when they were born. Even the nurse commented on their blue eyes. She said it was rare in newborns. Emma is more assertive, Thomas commented, almost to himself. Lily seems more shy, Sophie nodded. Yes, they differ in that. But in everything else, sometimes it's like seeing you in duplicate. The way they tilt their heads when they think, the way they furrow their brows when something bothers them. Her words seemed to affect Thomas in a way no accusation had. He stood abruptly, pouring another glass of whiskey. What do you want, Sophie? What do you expect to happen now? I want nothing. I never did. I just had nowhere else to go. It can't stay like this, he said after a moment. You understand, don't you? There are legal matters to consider. Paternity rights, child support, inheritance. No, Sophie cut him off firmly. Don't turn our daughters into another one of your business contracts. They are my heirs. His voice rose for the first time. The sole heirs to the Steinberg Empire. You really think this can just be ignored? That my board and my shareholders will pretend none of this exists? Sophie felt a chill. This was exactly what she had always feared, seeing her daughters turned into pawns in Thomas's corporate game. I'll call my lawyers first thing tomorrow, he continued, back to a professional tone. We need to establish clear parameters, define rights and responsibilities. And if I refuse? Thomas leveled those icy blue eyes at her, the same ones the girls had inherited. Do you really want to turn this into a legal battle, Sophie? Your resources against mine? The veiled threat hung in the air between them. You haven't changed at all, Sophie said quietly, standing up. You still think you can control everything and everyone with contracts and threats, and you're still naive, he retorted, thinking the world can run on feelings and good intentions. Every action has consequences, Sophie. You chose to hide my daughters from me for 4 years. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences of that choice. Your daughters, Sophie turned abruptly. They were just an inconvenient problem to you 5 minutes ago. Now they're your daughters. They've always been my daughters, Thomas exploded, slamming a fist on the desk. You're the one who deprived me of that knowledge. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, New York was fully lit, thousands of lights twinkling against the darkening sky. You know what's ironic, Sophie said finally, her voice tired. I spent 4 years protecting the girls from you, and now you'll use all your power and money to try to control their lives. It's not about control, Thomas replied, calmer. It's about rights. Theirs and mine. Sophie walked to the door but paused before opening it. Do you want to know why they called you Daddy today? Why they recognized you? Thomas lifted his gaze, waiting. Because every night, when they ask about their father, I show them your photo in the newspaper. I tell them you're a very important, very busy man. That may be one day. She swallowed hard. I never wanted them to grow up hating or resenting you, even after everything. Thomas's expression changed subtly. something undefinable passing through his eyes. "Sophie." "No," she interrupted. "It's too late for regrets now. Do what you need to do. Call your lawyers. But remember this, they're not a contract to be negotiated or a merger to be managed. They're children, our children." When the door closed behind her, Thomas remained motionless in his chair, staring at the spot where she had stood. In the window's reflection, he saw his own face, the same blue eyes that now belonged to two little girls who, in a matter of minutes, had turned his world upside down. Somewhere in the building, Lily and Emma were watching cartoons, unaware of the whirlwind they had set in motion. And in a matter of hours, all of New York would know that the powerful Thomas Steinberg had a secret, in fact two. The night had only just begun, and tomorrow would be even more interesting. Steinberg Enterprises awoke to a different atmosphere that Wednesday. The building was the same, the employees were the same, but there was something in the air, an almost palpable electricity, a tension that made the very structure seem to vibrate. Employees arrived earlier than usual, gathering in small clusters in the hallways. Conversations abruptly stopped whenever someone walked by. Furtive glances were exchanged over coffee cups. The entire office seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next act of the drama that had begun the day before. "I always suspected something was off," Patricia commented in the break room with a group of secretaries, "the way he was always so strict specifically with her. And that time she tried to quit about 2 years ago." Another employee chimed in. "He wouldn't allow it. Now it makes sense." Sophie could feel the stares as soon as she stepped off the elevator. The hum of chatter ceased immediately, replaced by a heavy, meaningful silence. Her walk to her desk had never felt so long, each step echoing in the office's artificial hush. She had carefully chosen her outfit that morning, a severe black ensemble, hair pinned in a tight bun, minimal makeup, a makeshift armor against the stares and whispers. "Good morning." Claire appeared at her side as if by magic, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you'd need this today." Sophie accepted the drink with a grateful smile. Claire had been her only real ally since the incident the previous day. She had stayed with the girls while Sophie faced Thomas, then helped her take them home once the office cleared out. "How are they?" Claire asked, perching on the edge of Sophie's desk. "Confused," Sophie sighed, turning on her computer. Emma wouldn't stop asking about her father all night. Lily's quieter than usual. I think she realizes something's wrong. Across the office, a group of analysts stopped talking abruptly when Sophie looked their way. One of them had the decency to appear embarrassed, but the others just averted their eyes. "Ignore them," Claire muttered. "They're like vultures circling carrion." Sophie tried to focus on her work, but it was impossible. Every time someone passed her desk, she could feel their gaze. Every distant laugh seemed directed at her. Her email overflowed with unread messages, most from curious colleagues, disguising their nosiness as concern or support. On the executive floor, Thomas was facing his own challenges. The boardroom had been full since 7 that morning. Raised voices occasionally leaked through the heavy oak doors. "This is a serious corporate governance issue," Eduardo Mendez, the CFO, gestured furiously at Thomas's table. "The board needs an explanation. How does this affect the company's succession?" "Our internal policies?" Thomas remained silent, gazing at the city through his office windows. His posture was the same as always, impeccable suit, shoulders squared, chin lifted. But there was something different in his eyes, a shadow that hadn't been there the day before. "We need a clear position," Ricardo Santos, the communications director, insisted. "The employees are speculating, and our business partners will start asking questions." "No," Thomas's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. "No official statement yet." "But Thomas," Eduardo protested, running a hand through his graying hair in frustration, "your reputation has always been one of absolute professionalism. This incident, they are my daughters." Thomas turned slowly, each word carefully emphasized. "Not an incident." The silence that followed was heavy, It was the first time Thomas publicly referred to the girls as his daughters. The directors exchanged nervous glances. No one suggesting otherwise. Ricardo tried to pacify. But we have to think about the company. The Steinberg brand. Years of work could be compromised if we don't manage this properly. Thomas stood, walking over to the window. Below, New York thrummed with its usual frenetic pace, oblivious to the drama unfolding atop a gleaming skyscraper. "You have 1 hour," he said finally, not turning around. "Prepare a full report on the legal and corporate implications of this situation. I want all possibilities on my desk before lunch." The directors understood the implicit dismissal. One by one, they left the room in silence. Only Eduardo stayed behind. "Thomas," he said softly, "years of friendship allowing such intimacy. How are you really holding up?" For a moment, the implacable CEO facade wavered. Thomas shut his eyes, and Eduardo saw something he had never witnessed before: vulnerability. "They have my eyes, Eduardo," Thomas murmured, "exactly the same." Meanwhile, back on her floor, Sophie struggled to maintain composure in the face of more whispers and stares. In the break room, 2 employees fell silent the moment she walked in to get water. In the restroom, she heard her name whispered among nervous giggles. "Sophie." Claire returned to her desk after lunch. "Got a minute?" They went to the now empty lounge. Claire closed the door before speaking. "My brother's a lawyer," she said without preamble, "specializes in family law." I can't afford a lawyer, Claire. He'd do it pro bono. Your situation, let's just say he's interested in cases where there's a clear power imbalance." Sophie considered the offer. She knew she would need legal protection. The look on Thomas's face the day before had made that obvious. "Thomas has an army of lawyers," she muttered. "And you have the truth," Claire replied firmly, "and 2 little girls who need their mother." By early afternoon, rumors reached a new level when Patricia was seen carrying a stack of documents to the legal department. The most popular theory was that Thomas was preparing to sue Sophie for breach of confidentiality. Sophie was mulling over Claire's offer when her phone rang. It was Patricia again. "Mr. Steinberg wants to see you in his office. Now." The walk to the top floor felt like torture. Everyone she passed seemed to know exactly where she was going and why. When the elevator doors opened, Sophie forced herself to take a deep breath before stepping out. Thomas stood by the window when she entered, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn when she shut the door. "Sit," he said. Sophie obeyed, choosing one of the leather chairs in front of the massive desk. The silence stretched on for several minutes, thick with unspoken words. "I have a proposal for you," Thomas finally spoke, still not turning around. "A proposal?" A chill crept up Sophie's spine. "Yes." He finally faced her, his blue eyes colder than ever. "A clean solution for this situation." He walked to his desk, pulling a thick envelope from a drawer. He slid it across the desk towards Sophie. "What's this?" "Your resignation letter," he replied calmly, "already signed by me, along with an updated confidentiality agreement and—" He paused meaningfully. "A generous settlement." Sophie opened the envelope with trembling hands. The figures on the check made her head spin. "You're trying to buy me," she demanded, her voice louder than intended. "Pay me to disappear with your daughters." "I'm offering you a dignified way out," Thomas corrected, settling back in his chair. "The amount is more than enough for you to start over anywhere you like. The girls would have a comfortable life, a good education." "Far from you," Sophie finished, anger boiling in her chest. "Convenient, isn't it? The great Thomas Steinberg keeps his reputation intact, and we just vanish. It's the best solution for everyone involved." "Everyone involved?" Sophie stood, her hands trembling with fury. "What about the girls? How will they feel when they grow up and learn their father chose to pay them off rather than be in their lives?" Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, an emotion swiftly contained. "They're very young," he argued. "They won't remember." "Like you don't remember your father," Sophie shot back, instantly realizing she'd touched a nerve. Thomas stood abruptly, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "You know nothing about my father." "I know enough," Sophie pressed on, years of quiet observation fueling her words. "I know he left you and your mother behind. I know you grew up determined never to be like him. And now, Cal, you're doing exactly the same thing." "Enough!" Thomas slammed his fist on the desk, making Sophie jump. "You have no right." "I have every right," she retorted. "I'm the mother of your daughters, the daughters you just tried to buy off as if they were an inconvenient corporate acquisition." The silence that followed was suffocating. Thomas had turned back to the window, his shoulders visibly tense beneath his impeccable suit. "My father," his voice came out low, almost a whisper, "promised he'd come back. Every weekend, he promised. I would sit on the staircase, waiting for hours." Sophie felt her anger subside a little. In all the years she'd known Thomas, he had never spoken of his past. "He never came back," Thomas continued. "And my mother, she never recovered. She spent the rest of her life waiting for him, fading away little by little." "And you swore you'd never be like him," Sophie said softly. Thomas turned slowly. For the first time since she'd known him, his mask of control had completely fallen. "How can I be a father, Sophie?" he asked, his voice filled with a vulnerability she had never heard before. "How can I risk disappointing anyone like that?" "You already are a father, Thomas," Sophie answered gently. "The question is, what kind of father will you choose to be?" He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "What if I don't know how?" "No one does," Sophie gave a faint smile. "Do you think I knew how to be a mother? I still don't. But every day I try, because they deserve that. They deserve every bit of love we can give." Thomas picked up the envelope from the desk, staring at it for a long moment before tearing it in half. "What do you suggest then?" "First," Sophie stood, summoning all her courage, "stop trying to fix everything with money and threats. Second, let's figure out how to do this together, for the girl's sake, not your reputation or the company's." "What if I fail?" "Then you keep trying," Sophie said simply. "That's what parents do." She walked to the door but paused before opening it. "The girls asked about you last night," she said softly. "Emma said you looked sad." Thomas looked up, surprised. "They're more perceptive than you think," Sophie continued, "and much stronger than you imagine. Just like their mother." With that, she left the office, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. She had an important call to make. She would need Claire's brother's help, after all, not to sue or threaten, but to ensure the girl's rights were protected. Because now it wasn't just about her and Thomas. It was about Lily and Emma and the future they deserved. Back at her desk, Sophie found a photo of the girl she kept tucked away in a drawer. Their identical smiles, their sparkling blue eyes, Thomas's eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where they could have both their mother and their father in their lives. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe it was possible. Her phone vibrated with a message from Claire. "You okay? Saw you coming back from his office." Sophie smiled, typing her reply. "Better than expected. Send me your brother's number." The sun was starting to set over New York, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. From her desk, Sophie could see Thomas still in his office, now on the phone, gesturing as he spoke. But there was something different about his posture. A weight lifted from his shoulders, perhaps. Tomorrow would be another day of battle, but a different kind. No longer a war, but a negotiation. Not for power or control, but for the future of two small girls who had unknowingly changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, there would be a chance to heal all the old wounds. Sophie put the picture of the girls back in the drawer. She still had plenty of work. Reports to finish, numbers to analyze. Life didn't stop, even when the world seemed turned upside down. At the end of the day, when the office was almost empty, her computer chimed with a new email. From Thomas Steinberg Enterprises. "Come subject, tomorrow. The girls, and do they like ice cream?" Sophie smiled, feeling a small spark of hope flicker in her chest. It was a small start, tentative, but a start nonetheless. "Chocolate and strawberry," she replied simply, just like their dad. From across the glass, she saw Thomas read the message. For a brief moment, a genuine, uncalculated smile crossed his face. Sophie gathered her things and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new challenges. She had an important meeting with the lawyer, Claire's brother. She'd need to figure out how to explain all the upcoming changes to the girls. And somehow, she'd have to learn how to share motherhood with a man who, until yesterday, had been only her distant boss. But today, at this moment, as she stepped into the elevator, Sophie allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of someone who won a battle, but the peace of someone who finally found the courage to fight the right one. The office lights faded one by one behind her. Somewhere up there, Thomas Steinberg was still in his office, most likely thinking about the same things she was: identical blue eyes, smiles capable of melting icebergs, and possibilities that until yesterday had seemed impossible. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. And perhaps, just maybe, that was exactly what everyone needed. Attorney Enrique Menezes' office was located in an old building in downtown New York. There was no marble or mirrored glass, just a simple room lined with shelves of legal books and a sense of worn dignity. It was a stark contrast to the luxury of Steinberg Enterprises, and for some reason, that made Sophie feel more at ease. "Claire gave me the basic details," the lawyer began, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. "But I need you to explain everything from the start. Every detail could be important." Sophie took a deep breath. It was the first time she would tell the entire story to a stranger. "There's a confidentiality agreement," she began hesitantly, pulling some crumpled papers from her bag. "I signed it 4 years ago, right after I found out." Dr. Enrique studied the documents meticulously, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. His face remained neutral and professional, but Sophie could see concern in his eyes. "This complicates things," he said finally. "The agreement is quite broad, and with the terms broken, he can sue me. He can, but it would be risky for him." The lawyer leaned back in his chair. "A lawsuit would draw even more attention to the situation. And with children involved." "The girls are my only concern," Sophie interjected. "I don't want money, I don't want a scandal. I just want to make sure they're protected." Dr. Enrique smiled for the first time. "That's exactly why I took your case." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Thomas was in his penthouse apartment, somewhere that rarely saw daylight. An untouched glass of whiskey rested beside him as he gazed out the panoramic windows at the city. In his hands, an old faded photo, a blue-eyed boy sitting on a staircase, waiting. On the back, a date and a promise never kept. "I'll be back on Sunday, Dad." How many Sundays had he waited? How many empty promises had he heard before he learned not to wait anymore? The phone rang, pulling him from his memories. It was Eduardo. "The third quarter numbers are in." The CFO's voice was tense. "We need an urgent meeting tomorrow." "Schedule it with Patricia," Thomas replied automatically, his eyes still on the photo. "Thomas." Eduardo hesitated. "Are you okay?" "Why wouldn't I be? You seem different since Tuesday." Thomas didn't respond right away. The last time he had felt so vulnerable, so exposed. He had sworn never again to let anyone get close enough to hurt him. And now... "Therefore, Eduardo," he said finally, 4 years I lost." In Sophie's small apartment, another battle was unfolding. "But why didn't he come before?" Lily asked for the 3rd time that night. "All the other dads come to daycare." "It's complicated, sweetheart," Sophie tried to explain, adjusting her daughter's pajamas. "Sometimes grown-ups—" "Does he not like us?" Emma interrupted, her blue eyes, Thomas's eyes, shimmering with barely held tears. "No, my love, that's not it at all." Sophie pulled both girls into a tight hug. He didn't know about you before, and now he's trying to figure out how to be a dad." "Is it hard to be a dad?" Lily asked innocently. Sophie smiled sadly. Sometimes it's hard to be anything, Princess. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the office earlier than usual. From the top floor, he watched as Sophie arrived with the girls. She was taking them to their new daycare. He'd heard Patricia mention it. Something in his chest tightened as he saw them walking hand in hand, laughing at something Sophie said, their golden hair shining in the morning sun. They were his daughters. His. The word still sounded strange in his mind. They're beautiful, aren't they? Thomas turned, surprised. Claire stood at the door to his office, holding a folder of documents. Miss Chen, I didn't... Spare us the formality, she interrupted, placing the folder on his desk. I know you've been watching us every day this week. Thomas felt his composed mask slip a fraction. That's none of your business. Maybe not, Claire shrugged. But Sophie's my friend, and those girls, they deserve more than a father who only watches from a distance. You know nothing about the situation. I know more than you think. Claire turned to leave but paused at the door. You know why I helped Sophie. Because I grew up with a father like that. Always distant, always busy, always watching from afar. And when he finally wanted to get close, it was too late. Claire's words echoed in Thomas's mind the rest of the day. Reports demanded his attention. Important meetings had to be conducted. But his thoughts kept drifting back to that morning scene. His daughters, laughing in the sunlight. Later in the day, Sophie was at her desk when Claire appeared with 2 cups of coffee. How did it go with my brother? Complicated, Sophie sighed. Apparently, breaking a confidentiality agreement has serious consequences. Since when do you care about consequences? Claire teased. The Sophie I know never backs down from a fair fight. It's not just about me anymore. Sophie looked out the window where the sun was starting to set. The girl, they ask so many questions. How do I explain that their father is the man everyone in this building fears? Claire reached over and took her hand. You know why I've always admired you. Because you never let fear stop you. When you found out you were pregnant, when you raised the twins alone, when you faced countless obstacles, you just kept going. Sometimes I feel so tired, Claire, Sophie confessed. Tired of fighting, of explaining, of trying to do what's right. And that's exactly why you'll succeed. Claire squeezed her hand. Because even tired, you never give up. Sophie glanced at Thomas's office. He was on the phone, his silhouette framed against the reddish sky. For a moment, it seemed like he looked in her direction, but he quickly turned away. He'll have to decide, Claire said, following Sophie's gaze, whether he wants to be just the man in the office or a real father. And if he chooses wrong, then you do what you've always done, Claire smiled. Protect your girls and move on. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Sophie found an envelope in her bag. She didn't remember seeing it before. Inside was a single note, in Thomas's elegant handwriting. They deserve more than distant observations. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. Sophie looked at the girls' room, where Lily and Emma were sound asleep. She picked up her phone and typed a simple reply. Yes. But this time, let's do it the right way. In his apartment, Thomas took one last look at the old photo of the boy on the staircase. Then, slowly, he tucked it away in a drawer. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new challenges. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop watching from a distance and start being part of the story. But first, there was a company crisis to handle. The third quarter numbers didn't lie, hard times were coming, and this time, Thomas had far more to lose than just money or reputation. Steinberg Enterprises woke up in turmoil that morning. The usual office buzz had been replaced by tense silence, broken only by hushed conversations and the occasional ringing phone. The third quarter numbers had leaked, and they were much worse than anyone had imagined. Sophie knew something was wrong the moment she stepped off the elevator. Her co-workers' faces were pale. Some had clearly been crying. Claire intercepted her before she reached her desk. It's bad, she said bluntly. Really bad. What happened? The merger with the Asian partners, Apparently there were irregularities no one noticed. Investors are panicking. Stocks have dropped 30% just this morning. Sophie's stomach sank. The Asian merger was the company's biggest project for the past 2 years. All planned growth hinged on it. On the executive floor, the chaos was even greater. Thomas had been in meetings since 5 p.m., his voice occasionally echoing through the halls as he shouted in Mandarin on the phone. Eduardo Mendes, the CFO, looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "The Chinese are threatening to sue," Sophie heard someone say. "If that happens, the company won't survive," another answered grimly. Sophie forced herself to focus on her work, but her mind whirled. She knew the merger numbers like nobody else. She had spent months analyzing every detail. Something didn't add up. That's when she noticed it. A pattern in the reports, so subtle it would be easily overlooked by anyone who didn't know the company's operations inside out. She began frantic calculations, her hands trembling as she typed. "Claire," she called urgently, "I need the import reports from the last 6 months, all of them. Now, but the board said no one—" "Please," Sophie insisted. "It's important." 3 hours later, Sophie stood outside Thomas's office door, her heart pounding. In her hands was a folder containing her findings. "He won't see you," Patricia warned. "He's been in crisis mode since morning." "He'll have to," Sophie replied, and without waiting for an answer, she opened the door. Thomas was on the phone, his tie loosened and his usually impeccable hair disheveled. He shot her a furious look as she walked in unannounced. "Not a good time, Miss Ribeiro," he growled, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "It's exactly the right time," Sophie said, placing the folder on his desk. "I found something." In the following minutes, Sophie explained her discovery. The irregularities weren't in the merger itself, but in how the numbers were being interpreted. The difference between the U.S. accounting system and the Chinese system had created a discrepancy that, if corrected properly, would not only save the merger, but potentially make it even more profitable. Thomas listened in silence, his eyes scanning the documents she presented. Gradually, his expression shifted from skepticism to something akin to admiration. "How did you catch this?" "Because I pay attention," Sophie answered simply. "Not just to the big numbers, but the small details no one else notices." Thomas studied her for a long moment, as though truly seeing her for the first time. "We have to move fast," he said at last. "The Chinese expect an answer by the end of the day." The next hours were a blur of frantic activity. Sophie and Thomas worked side by side, preparing presentations, recalculating figures, structuring a new proposal. It was strange how well they seemed to communicate without words, anticipating each other's needs. "We need these numbers verified," Thomas said at one point, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Sophie was already dialing the finance department before he finished speaking. By 7 in the evening, when most of the staff had gone home, they were still working. The office was quiet except for the soft tapping of keys and the occasional clink of coffee cups. "Why did you stay?" Thomas asked suddenly. Sophie looked up from her laptop. "What do you mean?" "After everything, and why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you," she answered honestly. "I'm helping the company. Hundreds of families depend on these jobs." Thomas nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. "You've always been like that, huh? Always thinking of others first. Somebody has to—" Sophie shrugged, turning back to her work. But something had changed in the air between them. A different sort of tension, no longer hostile but charged with something indefinable. The following morning, the conference room was packed for a video call with the Chinese investors. Thomas sat at the head of the table, impeccable in his tailored Italian suit. But Sophie noticed he looked paler than usual. The presentation started off well. Thomas explained the situation with his usual eloquence, the investors listening attentively. But when it came time for the more complex figures, something strange happened. Thomas stopped mid-sentence, his right hand moving to his chest. His face went completely white. "Mr. Steinberg," one of the investors prompted through the screen. Sophie saw the exact moment his eyes lost focus. Before anyone could react, Thomas staggered and collapsed. The chaos that ensued felt surreal. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Eduardo tried to calm the investors, and Sophie, without a second thought, was by Thomas's side, holding his hand as he struggled to breathe. "Stay with me," she murmured, and for the first time in 4 years, she allowed herself to call him by his first name. "Stay with me, Thomas." At the hospital, the hours dragged like decades. Sophie wasn't entirely sure why she remained there. She should have been home with the girls, but something kept her waiting. Eduardo was the one who brought the news, his face grim. "A brain tumor," he said quietly. "Advanced stage. He's known for months." Sophie felt as if the floor had dropped beneath her feet. Months? He was diagnosed right after you asked for the salary advance. The world seemed to spin around Sophie. So many things started making sense. The rush to resolve the situation with the girls, the offer of money for them to disappear, the urgency in his actions. When she was finally allowed to see him, Thomas was awake, looking small and vulnerable against the hospital's white sheets. "You didn't have to stay," he said upon seeing her. "Shut up," Sophie replied, pulling a chair next to his bed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. What was there to say? That I'm just as mortal as everyone else? That my entire empire, all my control means nothing against a few defective cells? "The girls," Sophie began, but her voice failed. "They deserve more than a dying father," Thomas said bitterly. "That's why I tried to fix everything quickly. Give you two a comfortable life before dying." Sophie felt tears burn her eyes. "And you don't think they deserve to know their father, no matter how short the time?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the city continued its frenetic rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that hospital room. "I'm scared," Thomas finally confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Not of dying, but of forming bonds that will be broken, of making promises I can't keep, of becoming like your father," Sophie finished gently. Thomas nodded, a single tear sliding down his face. "The difference," Sophie said, taking his hand, "is that your father chose to leave. You're fighting to stay." For the first time since she'd met him, Sophie saw Thomas truly cry. There were no dramatic sobs, no overt display of emotion, just silent tears from a man who had finally allowed himself to be vulnerable. "How long?" she asked gently. "Doctors say a few months, maybe a year with treatment." Sophie squeezed his hand. "Then we have work to do. First, we still need to save the company. Yes, that presentation has to happen. Then," she paused, "then you're going to meet your daughters. Really meet them this time." "What if I don't know how?" "No one knows," Sophie smiled sadly. "But you have something your father never did." "What's that?" "The awareness that time is too precious to waste on fear." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "How do you do it?" he asked finally. "Stay so strong after everything I've done." "Because someone has to," Sophie answered simply. "And because our girls deserve to see that even under the worst circumstances, we can choose to be better." By the time Sophie finally left the hospital that night, something fundamental had shifted between them. It wasn't forgiveness, there was still much to resolve, much to say. But it was understanding. It was humanity. At her apartment, she found the girls asleep in the living room, waiting for her. Their peaceful faces, so much like Thomas's, now held new meaning, a new urgency. Tomorrow would be another day. There was still a company to save, a merger to finalize, and more importantly, a father to properly introduce to his daughters. Time might be short, but maybe there was enough to create memories that would last forever. Thomas gazed at the city from his office, but for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business. The medical diagnosis weighed in his pocket like lead. 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. It was strange how the certainty of death could bring such clarity to life. "They're here," Patricia announced quietly from the doorway. Thomas turned, his heart racing in a way no business deal had ever provoked. Through the glass, he saw Sophie arriving with the girls. Lily and Emma were dressed alike, blue dresses that made their eyes look even more stunningly blue. His eyes. "Send them in," he said, his voice coming out rougher than usual. Sophie entered first, holding the girls' hands. It was Sunday, and the office was empty except for them. Thomas had insisted on that. He wanted this moment to be private, away from curious eyes and whispers. "Girls," Sophie said gently, "remember what we talked about? About Daddy wanting to get to know you both properly." Emma took a step forward, always the braver one. "You're not going away anymore." The question hit Thomas like a punch in the gut. How many times had he asked the same question, sitting on that childhood staircase? "No," he replied, kneeling to their eye level. "I'm not leaving." Lily, still partially hiding behind Sophie, studied him curiously. "You work a lot," she said, matter of fact. "Yes," Thomas admitted, "but I'm learning that some things are more important than work." He reached behind his desk and produced 2 colorfully wrapped packages. "I brought something for you." The girls' eyes sparkled with interest. Sophie gave a slight nod, giving them silent permission to accept. Inside the packages were 2 identical teddy bears, except for the colors, one pink and one purple, matching each girl's favorite color, as Sophie had mentioned. "How did you know?" Emma asked, hugging the purple bear. "Your mom told me," Thomas smiled. "She tells me a lot about you." "She tells us about you too," Lily spoke for the first time, her voice small but clear. "She says you live alone in a really tall apartment building. And that you like chocolate and strawberry ice cream," Emma added. Thomas looked at Sophie in surprise, and she shrugged with a small smile. "It's true," he confirmed. "Did you know that was my favorite when I was your age?" "Tell us more," the girls chimed in unison, and Thomas finally understood what Sophie meant about them being different but the same. In the next few minutes, Thomas found himself doing something he never thought he would, sharing childhood stories. About the dog he had at 6, how he loved playing in the rain, the old house with the wooden staircase. "Did you wait for your dad on that staircase too?" Lily asked innocently. The silence that followed was heavy. Sophie took a step forward, ready to intervene, but Thomas raised his hand. "Yes," he answered honestly. "I waited. For a very long time." "Did he come back?" Emma wanted to know. "No," Thomas felt his voice catch slightly. "That's why I promised myself I'd be different with you." The girls looked at him with that inexplicable wisdom children sometimes have. "Are you crying?" Lily asked, moving closer. Thomas hadn't realized the single tear rolling down his cheek. Before he could answer, 2 pairs of small arms wrapped around him in a hug. Sophie stood by, her heart tight in her chest, watching Thomas Steinberg, the most powerful man she knew, completely disarmed by 2 4-year-olds, was something she never imagined witnessing. The rest of the morning felt like a dream. Thomas showed the girls around the office, answered 100 questions, listened to stories about daycare, about their favorite cartoons, about how Emma was always losing a shoe and Lily always found it. When they finally got tired, the twins fell asleep on the sofa in his office, clutching their new teddy bears. "They're incredible," Thomas said softly, watching them sleep. "They are," Sophie agreed, sitting next to him, "and they deserve to know their father for real, not just stories and newspaper photos." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. "I don't have much time, Sophie." "Then use what you have wisely." She hesitated before continuing. "What do you plan to do now?" "Make changes," he said simply. "At the company, in my life, in everything." "What kind of changes?" "The kind I should have made a long time ago." Thomas turned to face her. "Decent family policies, an on-site daycare, flexible hours for mums and dads." Sophie studied him in surprise. "Who are you and what have you done with Thomas Steinberg?" He chuckled softly. Let's just say almost dying gives you perspective. His expression turned serious. Sophie, about the past? No, she interrupted gently. Now's not the time for that. Now's the time to build something new for them. Thomas nodded, turning his gaze back to the sleeping girls. Do you think they could love me one day? They already do, Sophie answered simply. Children have an incredible capacity for love, even when they don't understand everything. The question is, are you ready to accept that love? I'm not sure I deserve it. It's not about deserving. Sophie placed her hand over his, surprising them both with the gesture. It's about choosing to be better each day. For them. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, bathing the office in a golden light. On the sofa, Lily shifted in her sleep, murmuring something about ice cream. Emma hugged her teddy bear tighter. Right there, watching his daughters sleep, Thomas Steinberg made a silent promise. Not to them, not to Sophie, but to himself. Whatever time he had left, he would use it to create memories that would outlast his own absence. Tomorrow, there would be changes at the company. But today, at this moment, there was just a father getting to know his daughters, discovering that his frozen heart could still melt. Steinberg Enterprises awoke to something new that Monday. Employees arriving early were greeted by workers installing signs at the entrance of the old convention hall on the first floor. Lily and Emma Steinberg Corporate Daycare. Is this for real? One employee asked, open-mouthed. Looks like our CEO finally discovered he has a heart, another replied with a smile. In the main conference room, Thomas presented the changes to the board. He looked thinner, side effects of the intensive treatment, but his eyes shone with renewed determination. Starting today, he announced, Steinberg Enterprises will implement the most comprehensive family benefits program in the market. An on-site daycare, flexible hours for parents, extended parental leave. Thomas, Eduardo interrupted gently, this is going to cost a fortune. And it'll bring us even greater returns, Thomas countered, displaying some charts. Sophie? Sophie, seated to his right, a position unthinkable just weeks before, rose confidently. Studies show that companies with strong family work policies have 40% higher productivity and 60% lower turnover, she explained. The initial investment is recouped in less than 2 years. Thomas watched with pride as she delivered her presentation. Over the past weeks, Sophie had proven not just an excellent analyst, but a true visionary in human resources management. Which is why, Thomas resumed when she finished, Sophie will be our new Director of Human and Organizational Development. The news caught everyone by surprise, including Sophie herself. But it made sense. Who better to lead these changes than someone who had experienced firsthand the challenges of balancing career and family? Later, in the newly installed daycare playground, Thomas watched Lily and Emma play with other children. It was his sacred lunch hour. Every day, no matter the meeting, he reserved an hour to be with his daughters. Daddy, look! Emma shouted from atop the slide. I'm flying? I see you, princess, he replied, his heart clenching at the word daddy. It still sounded like music to his ears. Will you come to my birthday? Lily asked shyly, walking over. Everyone at school is coming. Thomas knelt to her level. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. It was true. His priorities had drastically changed in the last few weeks. Meetings could be rescheduled, deals could wait, but moments with his daughters were too precious to miss. In Sophie's new office, with a view of the city, they discussed the next steps for the program. The nursing room turned out perfect, Sophie remarked, reviewing photos of the renovation. The mothers love it. That was your idea, Thomas reminded her. Like most of the good ideas around here lately, Sophie studied him for a moment. He looked tired. The treatments were intense, but there was a new quality in his eyes, a peace that hadn't been there before. How was the appointment yesterday? She asked gently. The tumor hasn't grown, he answered, allowing himself a small smile. The doctor says the treatment is working better than expected. The girls give you strength, don't they? They give me purpose, he corrected, For everything. It was true. Every decision now was made with an eye toward the legacy he would leave, not just for his daughters, but for all the families depending on the company. Days turned into weeks, and the changes began to bear fruit. Productivity soared, and the work environment became lighter. Employees who barely spoke to each other were now meeting at the daycare, chatting as their children played together. Thomas became more active in the girls' lives. He was there when Lily lost her first baby tooth, for Emma's ballet recital, for parent-teacher meetings at school. "Oh, you're different," Sophie observed one evening, while they watched the girls play on the new rooftop playground installed at the company. "Good different or bad different?" "Human different," she replied with a small smile. Thomas reflected on that. Indeed, the man who once lived solely for numbers and profit was now someone who understood the value of small things. His daughters' smiles were worth more than any financial statement. The transformation at the company didn't go unnoticed. Other corporations became interested in the Steinberg model of family-focused management. Articles were written, speaking engagements requested. "Exam magazine wants to do a feature on our family policies," Patricia said during a meeting. "Tell them we'll only accept if they focus on real stories," Thomas replied. "I don't want just numbers, I want people." Sophie hid a smile. He was definitely different. One afternoon, while Thomas helped Lily with her homework in his office, a routine on Tuesdays and Thursdays now, she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, are you and Mommy going to live together again?" Thomas looked up from the math workbook, meeting his daughter's hopeful gaze. "It's complicated, Princess," he answered honestly, "but your mom and I are friends now. It's different, but it's good." It was true. He and Sophie had found a balance, a partnership founded on mutual respect and the shared love for their daughters. The following week, Steinberg Enterprises was awarded Most Family-Friendly Company of the Year. During his acceptance speech, Thomas surprised everyone by inviting Sophie to the stage. "This transformation," he said, voice trembling with emotion, "was only possible thanks to someone who, even when I didn't deserve it, never stopped believing in the best in people. Someone who taught me that leading isn't just about giving orders, but about inspiring change." Sophie, at his side, felt tears well up. They were no longer the ruthless CEO and the resentful employee. They were partners, friends, parents, each in their roles, but united by something greater than themselves. The company continued to grow, but in a different way, more sustainable, more humane. Once silent, tense corridors now echoed with children's laughter. The building that once symbolized corporate might had become a space of life and family. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the rooftop while the girls played nearby, Thomas reflected on all the changes. His time might be limited, but the legacy he was building, both at the company and in his daughters' lives, would outlast him. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked, joining him. "Transformations," he said simply, "and how sometimes we have to lose something to find everything." Sophie nodded in understanding. Tomorrow, there'd be a big ceremony, officially announcing all the changes. But today, in this moment, there was just a family learning that sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest gestures. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. The auditorium at Steinberg Enterprises had never been so full. Employees from every department, the media, representatives from other companies, all gathered to witness what the press had dubbed the Steinberg Revolution. On stage, floral arrangements in shades of blue and gold decorated the space. An elegant banner read, "Celebrating a New Era, Family, Work and the Future." In the front rows, Lily and Emma, dressed in matching pastel dresses, could hardly contain their excitement. "Is Daddy giving a speech?" Lily asked for the third time. "Yes, honey." Sophie adjusted the bow in her daughter's hair. "And then Mommy will too." Thomas watched the backstage chaos, his heart pounding in his chest. The treatment still made him weak sometimes, but today he felt stronger than ever. In his hands, the speech he had rewritten dozens of times the night before. "Nervous?" Eduardo asked, approaching. For the first time, not because of numbers, Thomas smiled. The ceremony began promptly at 10 o'clock. Eduardo, as chairman of the board, delivered the opening remarks, highlighting the impressive results of the past months: record productivity, the lowest turnover in company history, and unprecedented employee satisfaction. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Thomas stepped onto the stage, and the auditorium fell silent. "A few months ago," he began, voice steady despite his emotion, "I believed I knew everything about success. Numbers, strategies, markets. Those were the only metrics that mattered. Until..." His eyes found his daughters in the front row. "Until two little teachers showed me there was much more to learn." He paused, letting his words sink in. Steinberg Enterprises has always been known for business excellence. Today, I want us to be known for our excellence in humanity. Because I've discovered, perhaps too late, that true legacy isn't measured in profits or stock shares, but in the lives we touch, the families we strengthen. Several eyes in the audience shone with tears. This transformation wasn't mine alone. It was made possible by someone who, even when I wasn't worthy of it, believed in people's capacity to change. Someone who taught me that leadership is not just about issuing commands, but about inspiring others to evolve. Thomas gestured for Sophie to join him on stage. She looked stunning in a navy blue suit, her green eyes bright with contained emotion. "Sophie Ribeiro is not just our new CEO. Yes, you heard that correctly." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. "She's living proof that second chances exist. And sometimes we must lose our way to find our true north." Sophie felt her hands shake slightly. This part hadn't been in the script they had rehearsed. "Today we're not just celebrating new policies or structural changes," Thomas continued. "We're celebrating a new vision of success. One where no father has to miss his child's first steps, where no mother must choose between her career and her family, where work enriches life instead of consuming it." He turned to Sophie, symbolically handing her a golden key. "The future of Steinberg Enterprises is in your hands. I couldn't leave it in better ones." Sophie took the key with trembling hands, and when she faced the audience, she saw her daughters beaming proudly. From a single mother struggling to get by to the CEO of one of the country's biggest companies, the journey felt surreal. "When I first walked into this company," she began, "I was just a young woman with dreams bigger than my circumstances. Today, I see that young woman was right to dream big. Because true success isn't about never falling, but about how many times we get back up." The ceremony continued with the official unveiling of the new initiatives: the model daycare, the mentorship program for mothers returning to work, the education fund for employees' children. Each announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Later, when the formality of the event had faded and most of the guests had left, Thomas took the girls to the company's new park. The afternoon sun bathed everything in a soft gold, and the sound of children's laughter echoed in the air. "Hiya, Daddy!" Emma shouted as he pushed her on the swing. "Me too, me too!" Lily jumped up and down, waiting for her turn. Sophie watched from under a tree, her heart overflowing with an emotion she couldn't name. Seeing Thomas, the man who was once the epitome of distance and coldness, laughing and playing with their daughters, felt like witnessing a miracle. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked later, when the girls ran off to the slide. "How life can turn around," she answered honestly. "A few months ago, we could hardly be in the same room." Thomas smiled, that rare, genuine smile that now appeared more often. "You know what's ironic?" he said, watching the girls play. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was nothing like my father, and in doing so, I nearly made the same mistakes. The difference is, you chose to change. Thanks to you," he looked at her intently, "for not giving up on me, for giving me the chance to be better." "The girls gave you that chance," Sophie corrected gently. "I just showed you the way." The sun began to set, painting the sky in pink and orange. The girls, tired from so much fun, joined them on the grass. "Story time, Daddy?" Lily asked, snuggling into his lap. "Once upon a time," Thomas began softly. There was a man who thought he had everything, until he realized he had nothing that truly mattered. Sophie listened as he told the tale, really his own story, with Emma and Lily hanging on every word. The man who once ruled his empire with an iron hand could now cradle his daughters with so much love it made her heart ache. 1 year later, Steinberg Enterprises had become a case study in corporate transformation. Companies worldwide visited to learn about the Steinberg model of humanized management. Sophie led the firm with a unique blend of efficiency and empathy, proving that success and humanity were not mutually exclusive. Thomas's treatment was going better than expected. Though the future remained uncertain, each day was lived to the fullest. Every moment with his daughters was cherished. On that Sunday afternoon, the family had a picnic in the company park, now open on weekends for all employees' families. Thomas watched his daughters playing with the other children, while Sophie sat beside him, reviewing a few documents even on her day off. Some habits never really died. "Hey," he called gently, taking her hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that family isn't a weakness. It's the greatest strength we can have." Sophie smiled, squeezing his hand. The girls ran up to them, their cheeks flushed from running around. "Group hug," Emma cried, and soon they were all wrapped in a tight embrace. There, under the Sunday sun, with his daughters laughing and Sophie in his arms, Thomas finally understood. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, happily ever after isn't an end, but a new beginning.